Fraud charges continue to be a concerning trend for house church leaders throughout China, and a Christian human rights lawyer had some thoughts about the precedent case back in 2017. How has this trend grown over time? Next, a Chinese Christian was fined over 10,000 US dollars for renting out a venue for a church to use as a school as the CCP continues its fight against children in private education. Several trials also took place recently as we await to hear the results. Welcome back to the Bob Fu Report, where we cover religious freedom, human rights, and rule of law in China. My name is Jonathan Dingler, filling in for Bob this week. Our first story is about Dong Guangping, a Chinese human rights activist who has gone missing in Vietnam. His family suddenly lost contact with him at his residence in the Southeast Asian country. His contacts in Canada have strongly appealed to the Vietnamese officials to confirm his whereabouts and well-being. Dong's daughter, Catherine, said that for the past 2 years, her father kept a low profile in Vietnam, usually described as very good to the authorities without any kind of local harassment. However, she did speak to him on the phone in July, but has lost contact with him since then. According to credible sources, Dong was arrested at his apartment residence by more than 10 Vietnamese authorities, who also put a hood over his head and handcuffed him. Now, this practice is equivalent to hostage-taking, and there are fears that the Vietnamese government colluded with the Chinese government and handed him over. Catherine said that after her father went missing, she feared that he may have been deported to China by the Vietnamese government and is worried about his safety. She hopes to be informed of his whereabouts as soon as possible. Now, let's get back to Dong Guangping. He's 64 years old and was a second-generation communist who served as a Chinese police officer. He was dismissed from his job in 2001 for supporting the Tiananmen Square movement and demanding that the government vindicate the protesters. He was later sentenced to 3 years in prison for expressing political dissent, charged with inciting subversion of state power. In 2014, he was detained for participating in activities commemorating June 4th. And in 2015, he fled with his family to Thailand to seek refuge, where in the same year, Dong was abducted from his apartment in Thailand back to mainland China. In August of 2019, he was released from prison after serving 3.5 years. Dong was persecuted several times by local Chinese authorities, and he tried to float adrift from Shishi City, Fushan province, over to Taiwan. He was rescued by a mainland fishing boat that night and was later detained by police in Hebei province. In early January 2020, Dong Guangping fled to Vietnam and went into hiding in Hanoi. He kept changing lodgings due to residency issues and was waiting for an opportunity to go to Canada until his unfortunate enforced disappearance in August. It is not yet known why Dong Guangping was suddenly taken away in Vietnam and whether the Chinese had anything involved or what role they played. But Dong's whereabouts are still a mystery. Dong's family and friends are calling on the pro-communist Vietnamese government to give some sort of explanation and are urging the Canadian government and civil society to try and rescue him. Next, as some of our viewers know, Chinese dissident Wang Jingyu, living in exile, is on the Chinese government's wanted list because he questioned the death toll of Chinese soldiers in the India-China border dispute. He has been unable to escape intimidation in the Netherlands by those claiming to be members of the Chinese police abroad. Now, recently, Wang made an emergency call to Dutch police, and they took action to arrest a suspect. Wang tweeted that he had received death threats from overseas police officers claiming to be members of the Chinese state security, leaving him threatening messages, saying things like, "Go to your house tonight, and we're going to kill you, and you can go and command the Netherlands authorities to come and arrest me." Just weird messages like this. The individual who threatened Wang said he would arrive at 9 in the morning. Central Station in the Netherlands and demanded to chat with Wang, or he would go to Wang's residence and arrest him as a Chinese police officer in the Netherlands. The Dutch police took immediate action and informed the German police of a joint investigation. However, the unknown person who made the death threat did not show up at Hague Station on the morning of November 7th. And it was not until later that evening when Wang received another phone call from a different individual claiming to be a Chinese overseas public security officer who was about to arrive at the station. Wang again reported this crime to the police, and 10 Dutch police officers and 4 police vehicles rushed to the scene. After the police got there, they asked Wang to call the number back, and they identified a man wearing a hat in a Starbucks at the Hague Central Station as the suspect. The police then approached and arrested him. Now, Wang Jingyu actually videotaped the scene at the Starbucks with the Dutch police arresting the suspect from afar, and in the video, Wang Jingyu was heard saying, "We've caught the Chinese communist bandits." Now, this whole situation has been a part of a developing story in several countries, including the Netherlands, Germany, the United States, and Canada. Safeguard Defenders recently released a report detailing the CCP's disregard for international law, with its more than 40 quote-unquote police stations around the world. Now, these police stations are a threat to Chinese exiles and refugees. Police from these stations often harass those who have found a new home, trying to convince them to come back to China to, quote, answer for their crimes. Now, Wang Jingyu is no different. He has been harassed constantly by the CCP forces over the last year due to his active stance against the Chinese regime. The Dutch government themselves have already placed a high priority on this, asking for the Chinese government to disband these offices and leave exiles like Wang Jingyu alone. However, to be honest, nobody has really come forward with any viable solution. In fact, authorities in the Netherlands suggested that Wang should just stay in prison in the Netherlands in order to have the most security possible. I mean, really? That's the best solution we can come up with? It's not that hard to understand why, though. Wang himself fled to Germany earlier this year, which resulted in conflict with the government there due to CCP harassment. Chinese state security agents posed as Wang and issued a bomb threat to German officials, which placed Wang in a fight to clear his name. We cannot allow the CCP to continue its transnational repression. If you or somebody you know has been affected by this sort of harassment from the Chinese government, you must, and I cannot emphasize this enough, you must tell the authorities. Doing so helps them catalog these instances which other government entities can use for policy change within the United States and perhaps abroad. Chinese human rights lawyer Zhang Kai wrote an article in response to the Chinese government's frequent use of fraud charges against house church pastors and preachers. Now, the same logic behind these incidences is all over the country. If the church is not registered with the government, the church is illegal, and the pastor is an illegal pastor. Therefore, the tithe and offering the church receives are fraudulent. According to Zhang, such logic neither conforms to the law nor politics. The article recounts how a case back in 2017, which involved 3 Christians surnamed Wei, Li, and Zhang, were charged with fraud. Wei did not have a lawful pastoral qualification recognized by the Chinese government, and they conducted many religious activities at their church venue. According to court documents, these defendants continued to defraud, quote, offering from the congregation in the name of tithe and church development funds. Some of the tithe and offering was used to purchase commercial real estate in the name of Wei and Zhang. Some may know this as the Wang Jingyu church case. This case is the first accusation of fraud against house church pastors for receiving tithe and offerings. After that, cities in both Shaanxi and Shaanxi provinces followed suit and criminally charged house church pastors in the same fashion. Prosecuting entities accused pastors of not having legal ministerial qualifications, but in his article, lawyer Zhang Kai questioned Quote, who is qualified to determine a pastor's qualification? If the only way for pastors to become lawful is to follow the regulations on religious affairs, then almost all house church pastors are unlawful. Christianity has a history of more than 2,000 years, and it has its own tradition and standard. God and Caesar have their own realms. It's illogical that pastoral qualifications should be verified by an atheistic government through its government review and approval process. End the quote. We've definitely seen an uptick in fraud and business-related charges since 2017, including Pastor Wang Yi, who's not only charged with subversion of state power but illegal business operations, as well as Elder Zhang Chunlei of Renai Reformed, Elder Hao Ming of an Early Rain Church plant, in our next story, preachers Lai Ji and Hong Xiaodong of Linfen Covenant House Church. We'll get back to a development in their case in a moment. The CCP hopes to use the initial case from 2017 to create a precedent. Of course, anyone who has ever been remotely involved in a church knows that an offering or tithe is never pried away from believers or by any means coerced. Sure, there are some churches in the West who have misused these funds for their own gain, but the tradition of giving to the church is not fraudulent in nature. The goal of these charges is to cripple the church financially in China. And you have to hand it to them. The other side is crafty. The enemy wants nothing more for giving to be a crime and for the church in China to fail. So, what do we do? By going to ChinaAid's website, you can donate to families of prisoners, which helps provide for many of those mentioned previously. You can also give to our legal defense fund, which helps pay for these costly cases for so many Chinese believers. Speaking of legal defense, the case for Linfen Covenant House Church continues as a believer is placed in criminal custody after enduring a week of residential surveillance at a designated location. In total, 4 members of the church have been detained in some way or another regarding the false fraud charge. These include Han Xiaodong, Li Jai, we just mentioned them, as well as Wu Tingting and Wang Qiang, who was just placed in criminal detention. His notice states that the Bureau criminally detained Wang Qiang on suspicion of fraud on November 9th at 4 p.m. at the detention center located in Shaanxi province. Wu Tingting, a female co-worker of Linfen Covenant House Church, has been placed under residential surveillance on the same charge since October 28th, but there's no update regarding her. The 2 preachers, Li Jai and Han Xiaodong, were arrested back in August. They first were held under residential surveillance, but they were transported to their respective detention centers and finally arrested on suspicion of fraud in September. Li Shanshan is Minister Li Jai's wife, and she was also released on bail after her residential surveillance. So let's continue to pray for our brothers and sisters in Linfen. Huang Yanda, a Chinese from Shunsiding Church in Xiamen, was fined 100,000 yuan, which is equivalent to $13,000, by the local Religious Affairs Bureau for providing a rented house for the church school to use. The Religious Affairs Bureau imposed an administrative penalty of over $10,000 on Huang, the leasee of his house, in January, because he carried out religious education and training without authorization from the government. After going through the process of administrative reconsideration, the case entered the stage of administrative litigation and was held in court on the afternoon of November 8th. They struck down his appeal and reinforced the fine. Of course, we know this is an effort by Xi Jinping to quell and quench all private education, especially education centered on the Christian faith. Back in October 23rd, 2021, the 31st meeting of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress passed the, quote, Family Education Promotion Law of the People's Republic of China, which came into effect on January 1st of this year. The passage of this law basically means that the Chinese government is actively enacting tough measures to pry control away from parents in order to brainwash the next generation, forcing them to go to public school. Christians have made the majority of homeschools in China. In recent years, more and more Christian schools have been banned. In other news, authorities charged and convicted Chinese poet and painter Wang Jingyu and his wife Wang Lichen with inciting subversion of state power for their artistic expression and public support of Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement. They were sentenced to 4 and 2.5 years, respectively. In court, they both refused to accept the verdict and filed an appeal. One thing to note is that Wang Jingyu has a history of political dissidence. He criticized the Cultural Revolution initiated by Mao Zedong, which brought about great disaster to the Chinese people, which many of our viewers are aware of. He publicly expressed his solidarity with the well-known human rights activist Mr. Guo Feixiong and gave moral support to many human rights lawyers who were tortured and abused by Chinese authorities. He also cared about the self-immolation of Tibetans and supported imprisoned Uyghur scholar Iham Tati from Xinjiang. Now, back in October of 2014, Wang was criminally detained by Beijing police for picking quarrels and provoking trouble after he posted photos of him holding a yellow umbrella and organizing a poetry event on the internet in solidarity with Hong Kong's Occupy Central with Love and Peace. Some of you may know this was a civil disobedience movement. After 9 months of detention, he was released in July of 2015. And during his interrogation, Wang Jingyu was tortured and his wife was harassed by Chinese state security agents. Now, Wang and his wife were both arrested on May 30th, 2020, before the 31st anniversary of June 4th, the massacre in Tiananmen Square. The couple have been incarcerated in southern China's Yunnan province for more than 2 years now. Wang Jingyu is being held as a political prisoner in the same prison as those who are criminal prisoners. And it is a fact that Chinese prisons condone the harming of political prisoners by criminal prisoners. They're not going to enforce any kind of prison rules for this, for them having violence between them. Their 4 young children are under the care of Wang Jingyu's mother, and the daily lives of his parents and their children are being monitored and restricted. Authorities also froze Wang's bank accounts and seized his identification documents without allowing any relatives or friends to send financial assistance. Their financial situation is dire. Finally, Long Qihai is a Christian from Gansu province, and he was in court for the crime of picking quarrels and provoking troubles. Lawyer Zhang Kiki received the notice to appear in court on November 16th, but no other details have yet been released. According to many sources, Long moved from Shaanxi province to Chengdu, hoping to become a member of the Early Rain Covenant Church earlier this year. On Sunday, June 12th, a small group at Early Rain celebrated Long and another girl's birthday. Long Qihai said, quote, "This is the first time in my life to celebrate my birthday in the church. I am full of joy. Hallelujah. I thank and praise the Lord. I'm grateful to the brothers and sisters in the church for loving each other in Christ. I'm so, so happy." Unquote. However, on the same day, Long Qihai received another, I guess you could call it, birthday gift from the State Security Bureau. 2 decisions of administrative punishment were issued by Gansu province, each lasting a total of 20 days. A National Security Bureau officer told Long that these 2 punishments would not be implemented for the time being due to the COVID-19 pandemic in China. He was then arrested on July 25th after he went to watch the court opening session for lawyer Chang Weiping in Shaanxi province. Friends and contacts of Long confirmed details of his detainment with the National Security Bureau, but only suspect his arrest was due to him attending this trial. It's pretty unclear how attending a trial fits with the charge of picking quarrels and provoking trouble, though. We appreciate you joining us for the Bob Fu Report today. Bob was recently in Taiwan, discussing how the country, Taiwan, can be a beacon of hope for religious freedom across the world. He went with Nadine Mayenza, the International Religious Freedom Secretariat, He'll be back next week to bring you more reports from China. Until then, please enjoy this clip from ChinaAid's 20th anniversary banquet featuring Senator Ted Cruz. Have a blessed week.
Well, thank you, Bill. God bless the great state of Texas. And may God bless the oppressed people of China. It's truly an honor and joy to be back with so many friends. I love Midland, Texas. I think Midland is the most entrepreneurial place on the face of the planet. And I got to say to my dear friend Bill Holmes, Bill is an incredible friend. He is a business leader. He is a patriot. He loves America. He loves freedom. And he is a man of God in times of joy and times of sorrow. Bill, I love you. I love your wife. I love your family, and you are extraordinary friends and leaders. We're here tonight to celebrate the work of ChinaAid. And we're here tonight to give words of hope and encouragement for that work. That more victories are on the horizon. We are here tonight because religious liberty matters. We're here tonight because truth matters. We're here tonight because spreading the gospel matters. And we're here tonight because defeating the evil communist Chinese government matters. You know, it is easy at times to see a tyrannical regime. And right now, the government of China practices on an institutionalized basis murder, torture, persecution of Christians, persecutions of the Falun Gong, persecution of Uyghurs, over 1 million Uyghurs in concentration camps today. Modern-day slavery. And yet, what I want to give you an encouragement, it's easy to look at that and say, oh, there's nothing that can be done to stop that. And I believe history proves that wrong. Some years ago, I was in Jerusalem visiting with Natan Sharansky, the famed Soviet dissident. And Sharansky told me about when he was in the Soviet gulags, that the prisoners would pass from cell to cell notes. Did you hear what Ronald Reagan said? Evil empire, ash heap of history. And most significantly, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. An interesting bit of history on that speech before the Berlin Wall. If you come to my office, as many of you here have been, the most dominant feature in my office is a gigantic painting, it's 20 feet wide, of Reagan standing before the Brandenburg Gate with the words, "Tear down this wall," in German, in the style of the graffiti. When that speech was written, 3 times the State Department crossed those words out of the speech. And 3 times Reagan wrote them back with his own hand. And the State Department argued to him, said, "Mr. President, you cannot say this. It is too provocative, it's too bellicose. And most importantly, it's too unrealistic. It will never, ever, ever happen. The Berlin Wall will stand till the end of history." And Reagan, with a twinkle in his eye, he simply said, "You don't understand. This is the entire point of the speech." He stood in front of that gate and demanded that Gorbachev tear down this wall, and in less than 3 years from uttering those words, that wall was torn to the ground, and importantly, it wasn't knocked down by American Army tanks. It wasn't bombed by American missiles. It was brought down by the power of truth and light and sunshine and justice. These tyrannies that want to convince the world they are unshakable are much, much more vulnerable than they let on. Nothing terrifies the Chinese regime more than the 1.3 billion Chinese citizens suffering under their oppression. In 2019, I flew to Asia and did a tour that we called the Friends and Allies Tour. Started out in Pearl Harbor, then went to Japan, then went to Taiwan, then went to India, and finished in Hong Kong. In Taiwan, I met with President Tsai. It was Taiwan's National Day. It was the first senator in 34 years to be there on their National Day. Taiwan terrifies the Chinese regime because the people of Taiwan, they're ethnically Chinese. The only thing different is they live in a democracy where human rights are protected, and instead of living in misery and squalor, they live in prosperity and abundance. And few things terrify them more than the Chinese citizens on mainland China look across that strait and say, wait a second, why can't we live like that? Why can't we have that freedom? Why can't our kids have the same hope and future that the people of Taiwan have? In Hong Kong, while I was there were protests in the streets. They were incredible protests. Heroic protesters, many of which were kids, were teenagers, risking their lives, standing up, many waving American flags. I saw them holding up signs with quotes from the American founding fathers, quotes from John Adams and Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. Look, the American experience is a beacon of hope and liberty to the world. I met with many of those protesters, some of whom are imprisoned right now. While there, I did one of the Sunday shows by satellite, dressed in all black in solidarity with the protesters. Why does that matter? Because Hong Kong, like Taiwan, terrifies the Chinese regime. Because it shows the Chinese people can survive and prosper in freedom. Let me tell you a story to illustrate just how vulnerable and just how afraid the Chinese Communist government is. Several years back, I introduced legislation in the Senate to rename the street in front of the Chinese consulate in Washington, D.C., Liu Xiaobo Plaza. Liu Xiaobo, the Nobel Peace Laureate, stood heroically for freedom in China. Now, the idea I can't claim credit for. It actually is an idea Reagan had implemented. During the Cold War, under Reagan, we renamed the street in front of the Soviet embassy Sakharov Plaza after the famed dissident Sakharov. And I thought, well, it worked then, let's try it now. Now, 3 times I went to the Senate floor seeking to pass that legislation. 3 times, a Democrat, Senator Dianne Feinstein from California, stood up and objected. We debated it in the Senate floor. She stood up and said, you don't understand. If we do this, it will irritate the Chinese government. I said, yes, I do understand. That's a feature, not a bug. She refused to budge. And so in the Senate, one of the things you have is you have different levers of exercising influence. So I placed a hold on every single Barack Obama nominee to their State Department. I said, you don't want to do this? Fine. No more nominees are going through. And suddenly the Obama administration was losing their minds. They're like, okay, we need our nominees. I said, great. They said, well, how can we get our nominees? I said, very simple, pass my legislation. Well, they said, we don't want to. I said, okay, then you won't have State Department nominees. They decided they wanted their nominees. So the Obama White House got Dianne Feinstein to withdraw her objection. And my legislation renaming the street in front of the Chinese embassy passed the Senate 100 to nothing.